So we're going to learn a little bit about photography with an SLR. Well, hopefully we're going to learn a lot about photography with the SLR. Most of these rules are going to apply to any SLR you've got. So we can go ahead and just have a look through the basic things that you do get on an SLR. I'm not going to go into too much detail in this video, it's just basically an introduction. And I'm also going to cover the sort of things that maybe you want to consider if you haven't yet got an SLR and you're thinking about getting one. Whether I cover that in this video or in my blog, we'll see how the time goes. But your SLR, one of the main things that you're going to find that's new compared to having a compact camera is that you have a detachable lens. So most of the lenses will have a button or a slide just to the side. This is the Nikon D90, by the way. It's not a high-end SLR. It's not a bad SLR at all, but it's not, you know, top of the range. But it's enough for me. It's what I'm happy using, and it was within my budget, so that's what I went for. So on the D90, it's got this button here, so you just press it in and twist off your lens. So there's your detachable lens. Inside you see the mirror, and underneath the mirror there, if we just gently, you must be careful when you're doing this, just underneath the mirror there is your sensor. So your sensor is basically what processes all of the information in order to create your image. And on most lenses, this is a Sigma lens. Sigma make lenses that fit a variety of SLRs. They do make lenses that fit Canon and Nikon. They basically have a different fit, so you've got to make sure you buy the right one. So this is a Sigma make lens. They're good lenses, they're very affordable lenses. They're not obviously as good as a Canon branded one, especially not the L series, which are basically the professional series, but they're good lenses and I have no complaints at all with this one. This is the 18-50 lens. I'm not going to go into lenses too much, but basically most lenses will either have a dot on the outside. You see there's a white dot there on the outside, and there's a red dot on, can you see it? A red dot on the inside, and that will line up with a marking on your camera. So you see I've got on the front of my Nikon, there's a white dot there, so I line up the two white dots. So the white dot on my lens is here, and the white dot on my camera is there. So we line the two up, it slots on, and then you just twist and you hear it click, and that's in place. So basically any SLR that you've got should have will have a detachable lens. There's no should about it. So I've got my lens cap attached to the strap because I have a horrible habit of misplacing it or leaving it in my pocket and then sitting on it and whatnot. SLRs will have a hot shoe. You can put on an external flash onto the hot shoe. You usually have a button that will trigger your flash. Mine's down here. I have no battery. I've lost my charger, so there's one on the way. But if I pressed that and the camera's on, it would flip up and I'd have the flash there. Here, yeah, it says BKT on it. That stands for bracketing. It's basically a lot of the HDR photos that we've been doing. It basically compiles 3 photos together to make a high quality image. You can do that with bracketing, so you have the option to switch bracketing on there. Again, we'll talk through that at a later date. Pretty much all SLRs will have a bracketing button somewhere, or they will have the function built into the camera. Down here we've got autofocus and manual focus. There's usually a switch on the lens anyway. You see there, autofocus and manual focus, but you've also got it on the camera. So if you ever find that you're having trouble with your focus, double check that you have switched your focus to auto or manual depending on what you want to be on. You'll also see on most SLRs there's a little circle here. It's like a plasticky circle. That is an infrared sensor, so that's going to pick up an infrared signal. It's quite good if you want to use a remote shutter, so you want to take a picture without touching the camera. You can point it at the camera and it will trigger the camera to take an image. You don't even have to have anything plugged in because the sensor will pick up on it. At the front here there's a bulb to help the camera focus when it's using the flash. So it will send a light out, the camera will pick something that it can focus on, then the light will go out and the flash will do its job. Here at the front you've got one of the function wheels. You'll usually have one at the back as well. There's one here on the back of mine. This makes it easier when you're holding the camera. You've got access to that front wheel and the back one, so you can quite often change your settings without even having to take your eye off of the eyepiece. That's going to be another big difference. If you're used to using the back screen of the camera, it is always better to look through the eyepiece. You'll be a lot more accurate because you are able to line it up a lot more accurately. Your hands are going to be a lot more stable. If you're holding it like this, it's not as stable as if you're holding it with a good grip. And in general, I love looking through the eyepiece. I hate using the back screen. I did quite like using the back screen on the SX40, but not with an SLR. I don't know why. I think because the SX40 didn't have a very good display when you look through the eyepiece, whereas this is actually looking through the lens. On the SX40, we were looking through the eyepiece and it was giving you a digital representation of what the lens was seeing, whereas here, what you're seeing here goes down to that mirror that we saw through the lens, and then that mirror is showing you what is coming directly through the lens, so you are seeing what your lens is seeing. There's a delete button on the back there, which you'll quite often have on one of your cameras. You'll find that there's a lot of things either written or on the button, so the functions will happen at different points. So basically when you're taking pictures, this button becomes your ISO button, so you'd hold that down and turn one of the wheels to change your ISO. But if you were reviewing pictures, that button becomes the zoom and you're zooming into your pictures. So there's a lot of different functions just on the back of the camera, let alone within the main menu. So on the D90, we've got the review button here. That's to play back any images and have a look at them. You've got your menu button for your main menu settings. You've got your lock and your information button. That's basically if you want to save a picture, preserve it. That also works as a white balance. So your white balance helps with your exposure in your image. It helps help you get the colour balance right, basically. So you take a sample of something white and it tells the camera that that is what white should look like, so then it adjusts the colours according to that. Further down we've got our buttons. They stand for zooming in, zooming out and zooming in, but you've also got, as I said, your ISO there, so your ISO changes the amount of light that's coming in and out of your image, and you've got your quality, so you change the quality of the image. Over the other side, auto exposure lock and auto focus lock, so these are going to help you adjust your focus and your exposure. On the D90 we've got LV, that stands for live view. Live view is quite often hidden in different places on different cameras, but it basically means that you're going to be using the back screen instead of looking through the eyepiece. You've got your navigation buttons here, very handy for when you're playing back your images, but you don't tend to really use when you're setting up an image in general. You will use it at certain points, but not the majority of the time, on this model anyway. You've got another lock button here at the back, and you've got an information button, so if you want to see information about the picture, how the exposure is, anything like that, you hit that button and it will tell you everything about the picture that you've got up on the screen. At the top here we've got an autofocus button just to help you with your focus if you're struggling, if you want to tell your camera to focus, but at the same time I tend to just press and hold down the shutter button. You've got your multi-shot button there, so you'll be able to decide if it takes a single shot, multiple shots, bracketed shots, everything like that. This also works as the timer and the remote release. So remember I was talking about that sensor spot at the front? If you wanted to take a picture using that, you would trigger it by choosing the remote trigger and self-timer. A lot of us have used self-timer on our compact cameras. Then we come to your exposure, so you can decide to tell your camera if you find that all of your pictures with the current settings are coming out too underexposed, but you don't want to mess around with the settings you've already got, you can just tell your camera to temporarily over or underexpose your images by just pressing that and changing a setting. And then you've got your metering, so where your camera is going to be taking its light samples from, so it figures out the average light within a space. So without going into too much detail, that is basically the summary of the sort of things that you'd find on your SLR. When it comes to picking your SLR, I'll probably do a lot more on my blog, but there's things to consider. The processor of the camera, that is going to affect a lot of things like the speed of the images that you can take, the amount of images you can take in one go. Your lens is definitely going to be a big thing. A lot of cameras, they come with a standard kit lens. It's usually sort of 18 to 55, something like that. So it's just like a standard lens. If you are looking at cameras in shops, bear in mind that a rubbish lens can make a very good camera look worse, and vice versa. A bad camera can make a very good lens seem worse, because you need to get the right right lens and the right camera for the right balance. But in general, you tend to get a pretty good standard lens to come with your camera. As I said, this was a Sigma lens that I bought because my camera came on its own. It didn't come with a lens, and I'm actually very happy with it. But a lot of people would think this isn't really anything fantastic, but I wasn't looking for anything fantastic. I was looking for something that would just let me take photos. I just realised I haven't talked through this the settings button up here, just in case you're not familiar with the sort of things you can get. You've got auto mode, which a lot of people, when they start off with SLRs, they do stick to auto, which is understandable. There's a hell of a lot going on. It's not always easy to remember what's what. You've got your no flash option, so it's basically auto without the flash. You've got portrait mode. That'll tend to give you softer tones. It'll tend to be more complementary to the skin. You've got landscape. It tends to bring out more natural colours, greens and blues, for good scenic shots. You've got macro here. It's trying to pick up small detail. This is also very dependent on your lens. The camera can't do all the macro work, but that's what that option is. Macro tends to bring out quite a lot of colour as well. It's probably due to the fact that it's expected to be picking up things like flowers and natural things. Sports mode, that is for fast-paced photography. I actually find that it's easier to use manual for fast shots, mainly because if the lighting isn't right, the camera can't seem to figure out the best way to compensate for it. Sports mode, we'll get back to that one. You've got night portrait, so it's going to take into consideration that there's low light, and it will try and do the best to reduce the grain, so the graininess of the image that's been taken in the dark. M is for manual, my favourite setting, even though sometimes I do get it a little bit wrong, don't we all? A is for aperture value. It's basically prioritising your aperture. Again, I'm not going to go into it in too much detail because we're going to do a whole series on these. S is for shutter, so it's going to take into consideration the speed of your shot, how fast you're taking your image. And P is for program, which basically it limits what you can alter in terms of your settings, but it's actually quite good if you're starting out and you don't want to go straight onto fully manual. Program is quite good at getting used to what settings to change and things like that. The last thing I really want to mention when you are choosing what SLRs to go for, if you decide that you want to go ahead and get an SLR, don't be too caught up on brands. A lot of people like Canon, Nikon, they fight it out. There are a lot of people who actually admit that they have no reason for picking either Canon or Nikon other than brand loyalty. I worked with Canon cameras for 4 years. I was working with Canon cameras. I got to know the Canon cameras very well, and I got the power shot not because it was a Canon, but because of the zoom on it. So it's I don't have any brand loyalty because I went for a Nikon. So really don't focus too much on brand, because look at the cameras, look at what the camera can offer you, look at the sort of lenses. Your budget is going to have an impact if you're restricted on the amount you can spend. But don't just look at the most recent models either, because bearing in mind the D90's been around for a couple of years now. I got my Nikon brand new, but it was as if it was a second-hand price because it's been around for a couple of years, and it's a great camera. I don't regret getting my Nikon for a second. And it's not just Canon and Nikon. You've got Olympus, you've got Panasonic, you've got Pentax. Pentax was a really big player in the world of film photography. Sony, Samsung. It's not all about megapixels either. Everyone seems to focus on megapixels when they're buying a camera. Obviously megapixels are important for quality of an image, but so are lenses, and so is your sensor size. Your sensor size is a very big thing. Basically, if your camera has a crop factor, it's not a full frame sensor, which means that you're not getting, if you're looking through a 18mm lens, you're not necessarily seeing an 18mm shot because the sensor is smaller than what the lens can give. And when you're buying an SLR, there's so many things to consider, so think about it as long as you can, really, before you crack and want to buy one. So I'm going to leave it at that for now. Hopefully that'll give you some things to think about, and I'll come back